Welcome to the Holy Land and this biblical site of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the place that God chose to dwell in a special place and where He had the temple built. What you're seeing right now in the background, you see the Dome of the Rock, that is approximately where the temple used to be. So there's a lot of things that happened right here in this area. We'll just point out a few to you, and then we'll talk about a little bit of the history biblically of Jerusalem. It's a fascinating historical account, and I think you're going to find this video especially enlightening. So down behind me in the bottom of the hill is where the Garden of Gethsemane is. That's where Christ prayed, sweat great drops of blood. Right beyond that is the Kidron Valley, or the Valley of Jehoshaphat. That's where when Christ comes back in power and great glory, that's where He will judge the nations, and the wine press will be there, and the blood will flow for approximately 180 miles down to the Dead Sea and then to the Red Sea. So the nations are gathered right there at the end of the tribulation period. Obviously, you see the Temple Mount there. You see the dome where the temple used to be, and you see that that's the place where the early church met. We believe on the southern stairs over to our left there is where the early church was born, approximately right in that area. The upper room is just over to the left. Caiaphas, where Christ appeared, is just down from the upper room. So there's a lot of rich things that happened right here. Golgotha, where Christ was crucified, is just over to my right away. So it's rich in its history, and we're going to be talking about a few of those things and about Jerusalem here in this video. So first of all, Jerusalem means city of peace, and unfortunately it has been nothing but that. This morning on our way here, we encountered a lot of policemen because there's been some problems here in Israel and on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So we saw a lot of police force. But originally it means a city of peace, and it will be a city of peace when Christ comes back at the end of the tribulation and reigns here for 1,000 years with a rod of iron. There will be absolute peace and perfect justice. Jerusalem is mentioned over 500 times in the Bible. It's mentioned more than almost any other place. It's obviously mentioned more than any other town or city in the Bible. It is first mentioned as the city from which King Melchizedek, king of Salem, or Jerusalem, was from. So Melchizedek was the king of Salem, this exact same place. So the last part of Jerusalem is Salem. So Jerusalem comes from this place that was before called Salem, and then it was transferred to become Jerusalem. So anyway, Melchizedek was a figure of Christ, and he was the king here. And it says in Hebrews 7:1 that speaking of Melchizedek, the high priest, is that Melchizedek, it says, was the king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. And he met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. And then Abraham gave him 1/10 of everything. So anyway, this city, Jerusalem, comes from that word Salem, which means king of peace. So Jerusalem means city of peace. Jerusalem is the special dwelling place of God on this earth. God chose to reveal Himself through a people and through a land to give His message to all of mankind. So in some regards, the nation of Israel and this land is the mouthpiece, is the vehicle of which God chose to speak to all of us. So anyway, Jerusalem is God's special chosen place, and the Temple and the Temple Mount was God's laser beam, where He really, it was the Holy of Holies, where His presence was there, and we'll see that in a moment. So in Psalm 135 it says, "Praise be to the Lord from Zion, to Him who dwells in Jerusalem. Praise the Lord." And Psalm 76 says, "His tent is in Salem," or Jerusalem, "His dwelling place in Zion." So it was in Jerusalem that Abraham was to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And so he came from Beersheba, traveled up here to Mount Moriah, and where Abraham was going to offer Isaac as a sacrifice is the exact location where the temple was built by Solomon. So it's absolutely fascinating how God, in His foreknowledge and His wisdom, knew exactly what He was going to do. And so Abraham offered Isaac, or was going to offer him, and later on there would be thousands of sacrifices offered here, and then Christ, the ultimate sacrifice, is offered. So anyway, God has chosen to dwell right here in a special way, and it was here that Abraham was going to offer Isaac. It says in Genesis 22:2, it says, "Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah," that's Mount Moriah. That's right where the temple is Mount Moriah. "Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain that I will tell you about." So it's right here. Jerusalem was partially conquered by the Israelites as they entered the Promised Land, but it was not completely conquered. It was King David who finally was the one who conquered Jerusalem and then set it up as his reigning kingdom place. And then David purchased part of the Temple Mount. It was a threshing floor, and he purchased it to build an altar there. And then King Solomon then built the temple in 960 AD on the exact location where Abraham was going to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And so then, as we said, David purchased it as a threshing floor. And it says in 2 Chronicles 3:1, it says, "Then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah." So you see the exact same place where Abraham was going to offer Isaac on Mount Moriah. That's where the temple was built on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite, the place provided by David. So David bought part of the Temple Mount as a threshing floor, and then it was later, that's where God had the temple built under Solomon. And you can just imagine the temple when God filled the temple. He came down in such brilliant glory. It says the priests had to stop all that they were doing so that until the glory left, and then they resumed all their sacrifices. So right there. And as we mentioned at the dedication of the temple, the glory just filled it. It says in 1 Kings 8:10, it says, "When the priest withdrew from the holy place, the cloud filled the temple of the Lord, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple." So can you just imagine right here, God's glory filling this, and we'll be showing you some close-up footage of the Temple Mount and things like that in this video. You can see that. Jerusalem became the center of worship in Israel. So the temple was built here, and it became the center of worship. It has remained that. Obviously, the Israelites went into deportation. They've come back. It's the center of worship. It is the center where God has chosen to focus his dwelling in a special way. Obviously, he dwells the whole earth. He dwells all things, but in a special way, he has chosen to reside right here on that Temple Mount. The kings of Israel reigned from here. The prophets of Israel spoke and ministered here. And then, unfortunately, the first temple built by Solomon was destroyed in 586 BC by the Babylonians because of God's judgment on the nation of Israel. As you know, they had fallen away. God led them into deportation. He sent them prophet after prophet after prophet to warn them. They did not heed him. So then they were deported and it was destroyed. Then the second temple, the original temple was, as we say, was destroyed. And then Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, those guys came back. And under Ezra, they raised and they built a new temple. It says in Ezra 6:3, it says, "In the first year of King Cyrus, the king issued a decree concerning the temple of God in Jerusalem. Let the temple be rebuilt as a place to present sacrifices, and let its foundations be laid." And in Nehemiah 2:17, it says, "Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." So anyway, Ezra, Nehemiah, they come back, and they rebuild the walls, they rebuild the temple under their leadership. And then the Temple Mount was then later enlarged in a tremendous way by King Herod from about 37 BC to about 4 AD. So just prior to Christ's coming, God in his sovereignty is absolutely amazing as you look at God sovereignly moving all the pieces and arranging everything. So King Herod was a master builder, and he enlarged this Temple Mount so it's approximately 35 acres in size, which means it's about 35 football fields in size. So it was massively big. He built around the temple that Ezra and Nehemiah had overseen, and he built a new temple that was glorious around it. The walls, it was an absolutely phenomenal, beautiful sight in preparation for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords who would come, and also big enough to handle the day of Pentecost and the birth of the early church and the meeting of the early church for some time. That's where the early church met, was right on the Temple Mount. So anyways, King Herod enlarged it, prepared for that. He enlarged the temple, and it was the temple built by Herod that Christ and the disciples would minister at. And Christ was circumcised right here after being born in Bethlehem, just over the hill. The Magi from the east came to visit Jerusalem to witness the birth of Jesus, the Messiah King right here. It says in Matthew 2:1, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Scripture records that Jesus appeared here at the age of 12, and that the custom of his parents was to come here on a regular basis. So his parents would come here, and Christ came here. Just in his ministry time, Christ came here many, many times to minister here. He drove out the money changers here. He cleansed the temple here. He preached from here. On the southern stairs is called the Rabbi Stairs. That's where the rabbis would gather their disciples and teach them on the stairs. It was the entryway right from the city of David, the old city of David. So it was one of the main entryways right onto the Temple Mount. So on that southern stairs, and you can see in this video, Christ walked up those stairs. He taught his disciples on those stairs. So, and we believe that the southern stair area is where the early church was born, the day of Pentecost that takes place, because you have 3,000 that are saved. There's probably 15 to 25,000 that are gathered, and so they needed to have a large meeting area. There's mitzvahs there for baptism. So it would have been the natural place. It was the 9th hour of the word of prayer when Pentecost happened. That was prayers in the temple. So well, here we want to show you the actual stairs here going up to you and show you the original ones. So I'm going to walk over here and show you where the original stones were. These are the original stones right in here going up to the Temple Mount. These here are the original stones right here. So these would have been the stones where Christ would have walked, where the disciples would have been taught. So all these are the original temple stones right here. And as I say, you had to walk up. You couldn't just walk up just in the smooth. It was a methodical walk going up. So right in here are the original. Then there's been some new ones placed right up here. So we wanted to show you these original stairs here where Christ would have walked, where the disciples would have walked, probably were taught right here on these stairs, and where we believe that, as we mentioned, that Pentecost probably happened right here in this area. So we wanted to show you these original stairs here. At the temple in Jerusalem is the place also where Christ was tempted by the devil, led up to one of the high pinnacles and said, cast yourself down if you're the Son of God headlong. Christ says, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Christ ministered here on a regular basis. He visited here at least 9 times during his ministry years, probably a lot more than that. Christ died on the cross right here in Jerusalem to the right of the Dome of the Rock there. Over some way, there's 2 places. There's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is one. That's a traditional site where they believe that Christ was crucified. There's another spot called the Garden Tomb, which is just a stone's throw away, just a little bit farther up the hill, and to my right over here is another option. But anyway, Christ died right here in Jerusalem. And Matthew 16:20 says, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the 3rd day raised to life. So right here, right at the bottom of the hill, as we mentioned, is the Garden of Gethsemane. That's where Christ sweat great drops of blood, was arrested, then taken to the house of Caiaphas to be tried, and then taken over to Antonia's fortress, Pilate's palace, where he was condemned by Pilate, and then led just a little ways over to the right to be crucified. Pentecost happened right here, as we said, we think on the southern stairs, kind of over to my left over here. It says in Acts 2:1, when the day of Pentecost came, they were all gathered together in one place. And it says, now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. While they heard this sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment, because each one heard them speaking in his own language. And it says, and those who accepted the message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. So right in this area is where Pentecost happened. The upper room is just up above the southern stairs just a little bit, so maybe it started there at the upper room and then came down and it mainly resided. But we do know that there were probably 25,000 or more that were right there, and scholars say, theologians say that on the feast during the festivals, the Jewish festivals, that the city of Jerusalem at the time of Christ would swell to somewhere around 150,000 people. So anyway, there needed to be a place where Pentecost happened, where multitudes could see it. So it was a public event. Stephen was martyred right on the Temple Mount, or close by, in Acts 7. Talks about that. Unfortunately, Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 A.D. as a result of the Jews' rejection of their Messiah. As Christ came down behind me in the triumphal entry, he paused And he wept over the city, and he prophesied that not one stone would be left upon another, because you did not recognize the hour or the time of your visitation. So in 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, and then it was later occupied by the Muslims in 636 AD. The Dome of the Rock was built then, and then it was captured by the Crusaders. This had a long history. Anyway, just a little bit of the overview. That's all that's happened here. But Jerusalem is called the City of Peace. It has been the center of God's activity, of His dwelling, of His ministry to earth through right here, and so many precious things have happened, as you can see in this video, and it causes me to pause and to reflect God's sovereignty, His master plan for His creation, the culmination, as we mentioned, it's right here below me in the Kidron Valley, or Valley of Jehoshaphat, where the wine press at the end of the Great Tribulation takes place. Christ returns back in power and great glory right on this Mount of Olives where we're filming this video right here. He touches down. So He will reign from here for 1,000 years during the millennial reign after the Great Tribulation. So it's just unbelievable. It says during the millennial reign that all the nations will come and gather to Jerusalem and bring their offerings to Jerusalem here. So unbelievable to be able to be here and see this. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about Jerusalem. So thank you for watching, and God bless.